The Chuck Schumer plan basically involves unending amounts of money to people who are unemployed, which really, again, it should last as long as the lockdown. When the lockdown ends, everybody needs to go back to work. Incentivizing people not to go back to work would be the problem. Okay? And if you think that those programs are not going to be permanent, you're wrong. 4 to 6 months of unemployment insurance is going to, Democrats are not going to stick to 4 to 6 months of unemployment insurance because the fallout from this thing is going to be broader than that. And instead of incentivizing people to get back in the workforce, they're going to incentivize people not to be back in the workforce. It's one thing to compensate people for the forced government shutdown. It is another thing to pay people beyond the forced government shutdown to stay out of work. They say that they want not only paid sick leave, but paid family leave for months at a time, that they want to forgive student loans. Like, what in the hell does any of this have to do with actually shoring up the economy at this point? The Democrats apparently have significant reservations about helping American business. This thing is just too pro-business for them. That's the big problem. Mitch McConnell last night, he slammed Nancy Pelosi for holding up the show. The Senate Majority Leader said, we had a deal here, and then Nancy Pelosi decided to walk it back for political reasons. Here's McConnell.
We had a high level of bipartisanship in 5 different working groups over the last 48 hours, where members who were participating were reaching agreement. And then all of a sudden, the Democratic leader and the Speaker of the House shows up. And we're back to square one. So we're fiddling here, fiddling with the emotions of the American people, fiddling with the markets, fiddling with our health care. The American people expect us to act tomorrow.
Okay, well, that is all true, and that's why the markets tanked at the open. They were down again significantly at the open, down like 18,000. So the market is down about 40% from its highs of just about a month ago, which is totally insane. We've never seen anything like it before. Meanwhile, again, what exactly were the Democratic objections here? Their big objection, the one that they are talking about supposedly, is that there's a big slush fund that is going to be handed out to states and localities and businesses run by the Treasury Secretary. And their talking point is that Trump is going to bail out his own businesses. Okay, a couple of quick things about that. One, if he does like exclusively bail out his own businesses, he's not going to win re-election. Right? I mean, that's perfectly obvious. Right? If the president does do that, if he were like giving a disproportionate share of the bailout money to his own businesses, not only is he not going to win re-election, he'd probably be in violation of the Emoluments Clause. 2, Trump's business is very large. It has many, many employees. Is it the idea that because Trump's name is on the organization, all those people deserve to be unemployed because of a vast government shutdown? So Trump shouldn't get the same sort of consideration. Trump hotels shouldn't get the same sort of consideration as Marriott hotels. By the way, Marriott just furloughed something like 2/3 of its employees. The furlough includes 2/3 of its 4,000 employees at their headquarters and 2/3 of their 174,000 employees around the world. And Democrats are holding this thing up. Now, if you ever want to see something incredible about media bias, the evolving New York Times headline on this thing is just unbelievable. So the New York Times had several headlines on this thing. It started off with an accurate headline and then quickly moved to a non-accurate headline. It said, Democrats block action on $1.8 trillion stimulus. Within a few minutes, they had changed the headline. This Sunday evening. They had changed the headline to, Democrats block action on stimulus plan, seeking worker protections. So now the headline is justifying all of this because otherwise the workers would not be protected. And then there's a third headline. And then it said, partisan divide threatens deal on rescue bill. So now it wasn't even Democrats blocking it. It was just that people couldn't come to an agreement. You see how the New York Times that is the evolution of journalism in real time. Pretty amazing. So again, what exactly were they upset about? Well, according to the New York Times, which of course is not biased in any way at all, Democrats risk the political backlash if they're seen as obstructing progress. They argued the vote on Sunday was premature, giving their remaining reservations about the measures. Negotiations continued. McConnell wanted to hold another vote at 9:45 a.m. on Monday morning, 15 minutes after markets open, to demonstrate to Democrats that their votes actually matter to the markets. Democrats instead pushed it back to noon at the earliest on Monday. The mood on Capitol Hill was grim because Dow futures fell immediately upon news that this thing started to fall apart. Democrats denounced the package as a corporate giveaway that favored big business over workers and failed to ensure that bailed out companies would not enrich themselves after receiving government aid. So they're going to micromanage these companies that they have now shut down. Right? They were particularly incensed at the inclusion of a provision that would give the Federal Reserve access to $425 billion that could be leveraged for loans to broad groups of flailing companies, leaving Congress with little or no say in which businesses could receive assistance or how it could be used. They want to now micromanage all of these businesses. They're looking to leverage their way into businesses that were profitable until 5 minutes ago when the government forcibly shut down all these businesses all across the country. And they're saying the business heads don't know how to run their businesses anymore. We know how to run their businesses anymore. So instead of just floating loans to these companies along the basis of how they run, and by the way, if you think that okay, I run a business. If you think that if we got a loan from the government right now, we wouldn't use that to keep our people employed, that instead we would just sort of pocket the cash for no apparent reason, you don't understand how businesses work. You really don't. Because in order for us to be operational on the other side of this, we have to maintain as much of our core employee base as humanly possible. Employers are constantly deciding who to hire and who to fire on the basis of efficiencies. Okay, and the fact is that when we come out the other side of this, people are going to need those employers. There will be a hiring boom on the other side of this when the market recovers. But saying to companies that you're going to micromanage them and you're going to dictate that they continue to have a certain number of employees, for example, like who the hell is Chuck Schumer to tell a company exactly how many employees they should be paying to stay there? There should be unemployment insurance that should be extended for people who are laid off. But also, the companies need to continue to exist, because if they don't continue to exist, these are not mutually exclusive. If the companies don't continue to exist, none of this is going to matter. And by the way, 5 seconds after this thing ends, the companies are going to have to fire a bunch of people, because guess what? Let's say that the federal government floats you a loan and says you have to keep 80% of your workforce employed. Right, you got to keep 100% of your workforce employed, or we are not going to give you the money. What do you think happens on the other side of this when we come out of lockdown and the market is still not there? Because it's going to take a little while for the market to recover. All those people are going to get laid off anyway. So what exactly are you talking about? And the business is going to take a major hit. Businesses know how best to run their businesses. And yes, we should be tiding people over. Yes, we should be ensuring that they are furloughed rather than fired. Yes, we should be ensuring that those small businesses continue to exist. But I don't love the Republican bill, but I like the Democratic proposals even less. Unending unemployment insurance, no loans to basically cut down all the loans so that Chuck Schumer can decide which businesses ought to get the loans and they can control exactly how these businesses run. Pretty wild stuff. And it does smack of a political agenda. And if that becomes permanent, if Democrats think that they get to run all of these businesses from the top down because the government declared that they were going to shut down all these businesses in the first place, it's the greatest seizure of private property in the history of the United States, if that's the case. If what you have here, I mean, other than slavery, obviously, and I don't mean the end of slavery, I mean the seizure of private property, meaning like you own your own labor. If somebody enslaves you, then obviously that's a seizure of you and your property. Okay, but other than the evil enslavement of human beings, this is the greatest destruction of private property in the history of the United States. If you're talking about shutting down vast swaths of companies and then saying to them that in return for the loan, we now get to run your company basically forever without an endpoint, because the Democrats are not proposing any endpoint here. Democrats say they're concerned about how the government would go about bailing out distressed companies, complaining the measure would give too much discretion to Mnuchin to decide who received funds, would allow too much time before he'd have to disclose the recipients, because the measure gives the Treasury Secretary 6 months to reveal all of this stuff. The draft bill would provide a total of $500 billion in loans and other support for distressed cities, states, and industries, including $50 billion for passenger airlines, $8 billion for cargo carriers. Again, I don't love any of this, but it's not exactly a bailout when you are forcing these things to shut down in the first place. Under the Republicans' draft bill, the federal government would be allowed to take stock shares or other equity in any business that accepts loans under the program. That's a provision the administration had floated publicly. I don't even like that provision. But with that said, shutting this thing down over Democratic priorities at this point is pretty astonishing at the last minute.